Yeah, really happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And it's a pleasure. I've been connecting with Wendy off and on for a while, and so it's really great to get a chance to meet all of you. So as was mentioned, I'm an associate professor just next door in computing science. And today I'll talk a little bit about a slice of my research. I hope it's relevant and you find it interesting. Feel free to interrupt me since we have a small group. Otherwise, there'll be time for questions at the end as well. So I direct the Interactive Experiences Lab. Screen is not moving. Oh, it is moving. Okay. So this is, I was the first person here to set up this lab about 7 years ago in human-computer interaction. I also have a small cross appointment with the School of Interactive Arts and Technology, so there's an EPCAT connection. And then Dr. Sheila Carpendale, who's also, I think, involved with some of your projects. She came in and she does more information visualization. And in the past 3 years, we've hired 3 new faculty. Dr. Xingdong Yang, who does more hardware stuff, Dr. Lawrence Kim, who's also doing more human-robot interaction, and Dr. Nick Vincent, who recently came actually, and half of his degree is actually in communications. So he's looking at AI societal implications. So it's a good group. Yeah, feel free to come by if you're ever in the area, and we need to do more events that help us connect with each other. But today I'm going to talk a little bit more into the kinds of projects we're doing and what research my students have been leading and so forth. So many of you are probably aware of what feature-rich software looks like, right? We probably use it every day, whether it's a spreadsheet application, some kind of photo editing you might be doing, or image edit, video editing, 3D modeling, programming, if you ever use an IDE, right? So all of these applications have made our life easier in some ways, right? We can automate a lot of tasks. They help us accomplish things that weren't possible before, right? They streamline our workflow and so forth. But while these software are designed to make our lives easier, they can also be really hard to use and troubleshoot, right? Especially for people who are not like us and are not necessarily growing up in technology or have training in computer science and related fields. So this is not a new problem for the field of human-computer interaction. There has been a lot of momentum in software usability and learnability. Back in the day, this is what the interaction looked like. Right? You sat in front of office workers, sat in front of a computer, and they were given these manuals if they needed help. Right? So I don't. Some of you remember back in the day, if you were using PowerPoint, you would actually get a manual and figure out, okay, I'm figuring out how to add a new slide. And this was the way in which people interacted with technology and having help and manual resources on their side. But these things quickly became outdated. It became very cumbersome to actually find the exact thing that you're looking for. And there was no sort of shared repository. Many things, these were written at design time, right, by somebody who worked at Microsoft and whatever other company. They didn't really anticipate all of the issues that may come up when people are actually using the software. And since then, now today we have many new ways to learn and seek help for software, right? Help actually comes built into many applications. So you can quickly, look up something in the index. If you're still stuck, you can Google something. You could also go to YouTube and find videos. It's a very common thing. You can find a lot of instructional material there. There's lots and lots of tutorials. There's lots of forums. Actually, this is becoming a primary way for many people to just go and ask something on a forum or look up something that other users have discussed. And you get a broader variety of problems that way that you can actually find. But, the software users and usage contexts are also changing, right? We're not just chained to our desktop environments like we were back in the day when you kind of worked with those mainframe computers. Now, you might be on the go. We have kids who are using technology. You have seniors. We have all kinds of new devices that are allowing us to interact with computing in a more ubiquitous environment, right? So this forces us to kind of think about, okay, how do we provide help to people? Should these resources be the same, and should they be presented in the same way? So I've kind of been asking this question in my research since my PhD days, more than 10, 12 years ago now. And the central theme of my work is how can we better support software users' learning and help-seeking needs? So we do both empirical studies in the lab and in the field and build our own interactive systems and techniques. And we have this interplay, right? We go learn from the field, then build these systems, and then go back in the field, deploy them, and learn, did we actually achieve the objectives that we wanted. My own personal training is interdisciplinary as well. So I started off in computer science here at actually SFU, but then my PhD was in information science. So very much I got a chance to engage with scholars from many different disciplines, and that's really shaped the way I approach problems and stuff. So not just like, let's build, like, okay, let's step back and think about the implications here too, do a lot of qualitative work, as well as the bringing in whatever method is necessary to tackle the problem that we have. So there's a couple of different research streams that we've been working in. First, and something really important to me, is really capturing the diversity in software help seeking and learning rates, right? Like, we do kind of stop treating people as if they're just a number as a user, and trying to really understand what their individual interaction is. My main technical contributions have been in designing in-application help and retrieval systems and techniques, and I'll show you a few examples today. And over the years, I've also learned from this research, like finding help is just only the starting point. We also have to think more about improving user engagement once they are invested in the learning process, what happens afterwards. So, and this is becoming more and more a focus in our research as well. Okay, so we've done lots of projects in a lot of different domains, starting with 3D modeling to programming tools to even educational tools, teacher training tools, AR, VR, authoring, motion graphics, video design. So there's been a bunch of domains depending on student interest. We've explored help and learning needs. But just to have a little bit of a glimpse, I'm going to focus on 3D modeling today, because we've done a large body of work in this space. So has anybody ever tried AutoCAD or any Autodesk type product? Oh, cool. Okay, there's a bunch of people, right? So you can imagine there's lots and lots of features, and these can be complex even for trained professionals. During my PhD, I had the chance to be an intern at Autodesk, and I got a firsthand look at, for them at that time, the problem was, okay, how do we simplify the design here? How do we build learning techniques and tools for these trained professionals? But at the same time, as we're building techniques for professionals, there's been this emerging users of 3D modeling software that are emerging, right? So a lot of casual users, artists, designers, even kids, who are trying to build their own 3D models. And this became popular, especially when 3D printing took off at the consumer level about 7, 8, or 10 years ago. So I had a student, Nathaniel Hudson, who was with me at Waterloo. That was my first position initially. So he was really interested in kind of helping these casual users of 3D modeling and trying to understand, their workflows. And we worked closely with local libraries that, they set up a 3D printer. It was all great, but nobody could actually use it because there was this step, you need to figure out how do you actually design a 3D model. So we did this whole, sort of study looking at who are these people, what are their motivations, and what are their workflows, and how are they sort of starting and, doing the trial and error and figuring out, we have grandparents who are trying to build toys for their grandkids, going to the library, trying to figure this out, or kids, want to design something cool for themselves, or people who might have accessibility needs and they want to build a 3D model, like a 3D printable thing to help them. So, we looked at a bunch of different of these workflows, and we found, one of the, again, I'm not getting into the details of every work here just because of the time. But one of the key things we learned here was how different people were in how they approached the learning and help seeking process for something that was technical and fairly complex. Most of these people came in as novices, and that inspired us to study this in a little bit more detail. So how do users of 3D modeling get help? And this was another student of mine, Kimia Kiani. So her thesis really focused on this. So when you are a software newcomer in this domain, how similar or different are you in terms of your help seeking and points of difficulty? And then, what types of help resources do these newcomers prefer when they do face challenges? So she ran a study looking at participants who had a range of different expertise. So we had 26 people in total, and they were all new to using the software called Autodesk Fusion 360. So it's sort of a lightweight version of AutoCAD. And we specifically recruited people from 3 different backgrounds. One was just the technical people who are like us, who have CS engineering backgrounds. And then one, we recruited non-technical people who came from arts, business, biology, linguistics, communications, all kinds of other backgrounds, but had interest in using 3D modeling software. And then for our comparison, we also had a few people who were actual domain experts. So these are people who had experienced 3D modeling in another application, but just had never used Autodesk Fusion 360 before. So we did a multi-phase study. We had an in-lab observational component. We got them to do take-home diaries, and then we did follow-up interviews. So in one of the main tasks that they did in the lab was to replicate, a simple coffee table like this. And we worked with experts to figure out what would be the simplest task we could do in the lab, within an hour that, anybody could kind of do. And this is the one that we came up with. And some of the key takeaways that we found, and we told them that they could use any resource they wanted online, but we didn't offer them any help one-on-one. So they could, they were free to use Google, they were free to use the built-in help inside the application and so forth. So some of the things that we learned there was searching for help was very difficult, especially for the non-technical users. And over, I've struggled to tell my colleagues and other people who are doing search and information retrieval, research, they think, oh, it's just a matter of finding the keywords. And I think we take it for granted because a lot of programmers are used to using like Stack Overflow and other kinds of tools that, we can like sort of do trial and error and locate something, because usually something very specific in code. But when you're trying to search for something, there's a lot of ambiguity and you don't even know what you're really looking for when you're initially something new. So capturing user intent is actually very difficult. And the other thing that we found was people jumped to using videos. They're more useful to be able to see like, oh, this is how you actually do the steps, so you don't have to spend time reading. But they were used very inconsistently. People would start watching a video, then realize if it's too long, it's not really getting what I need. It's not getting me what I need. So then people would just abandon them and then restart the process. It was kind of interesting there. And then there was just a lot of diversity in how people navigated these individual help resources, and how many points of inefficiency actually occurred during that process as they went back and forth between the application and a help resource. So let me show you what this meant. So here was a person who was a domain expert. So again, they kind of knew the vocabulary, they knew what they were looking for. They just needed to map their knowledge to this new application. And they did a couple of search queries and they said, Fusion 360 table. They found a video. They went back and forth between the application 6 or 7 times. And they were able to produce a result which was fairly close to the original image that we had provided. But this was a rare thing in the study. So most people produce nothing like this. And, these are all reasonable people, well-educated and experts in their own domains, but this is very typical of what we saw. Right? They would like start from a search engine, type in something, go try something in the application, watch a video, go read a text-based tutorial, go to a forum. And there was just this whole chaos that we saw emerging where people were going all over the place just to kind of, understand how to do the task. And this was a typical outcome from this process. So it was really interesting, right? Like, yeah, theoretically, you can find any resource on the web and you can do this, and there's so much learning. But, even when you give people all of these resources at their fingertips, they still have trouble translating what they need and expressing their needs and actually finding something relevant. So, then that's kind of validated stuff that I've been doing in my research that, what if we really allow users to retrieve relevant help within the context of their tasks? So they don't have to go and leave the application, go back and forth. Why don't we keep them close to the application and where they can actually benefit from the instructions? Mm-hmm. So some of the work that I've done at a technical level, design level, has really focused on inventing novel interactive help systems and techniques that push help where people need them the most. And the other unique thing about this work is also that I try to connect people with each other inside the application. So we've used things like crowdsourcing, community-based help, connecting people with each other, because that's where the value is really in forums, because you can directly get something in your own language, right? You're describing it in your own words, somebody can understand it. So why don't we bring that benefit and bring it inside the application? And one of the earliest systems that I built with in this space was actually coming out of my dissertation, Lemonade, which I'll talk a little bit about first, and then I'll talk about a couple of other systems. So these are, again, in-application help retrieval systems that connect users with each other in the context of their tasks. So in my dissertation, I introduced this idea of selection-based crowdsourced contextual help. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that users can find relevant question and answers from the other users in the context of the application itself, simply by making selections in the user interface. So it could be, you don't have to go search for anything outside. You don't have to go and like look up something in a forum. You could simply select something on the screen when this help mode was enabled, and you could find Q&A asked by other people at a particular location. So I did this work when I was at the University of Washington, and we did a few different live deployments. This particular one was at the university library site. So there were over 40,000 users. So you click on help, it changes the mode of the application. It tells you you're in the help mode now. And you see these little yellow question marks. They indicate that other people have asked a question at that location. And immediately when you click on it, you can see a few different questions that have been asked. And my empirical studies showed that mostly you could find what you were looking for in 2 clicks. And that was sort of the power of crowdsourcing, because people were sort of, converging on the same location to post a question where they were, going back and looking for an answer. So there was a lot of similarity in how people selected these visual reference. And that's why, the selection-based retrieval approach worked quite effectively compared to other things. If you ask people to describe the same problem in natural language, there's much more variation. But keeping it to visual reference, we saw this nice convergence that happened. And so and the way I built the system was for web applications, it was a JavaScript that you could just add on to any application and make this functional. So it gave me a chance to try this out. So when I was doing this, this work got a lot of attention in the press, and the university, they were very like pushy about like, oh, let's monetize this and let's get this out there. And so as a student, I didn't really know what was I doing. I wanted to be a faculty and get out and get a job, but they sort of pushed us in this direction, gave us some seed funding, and these were my 2 advisors, Amy Coe and Jake Bobrock. And then they were on sabbatical. They're like, oh yeah, there's something here, let's explore this. And it ended up becoming a startup. And we actually just got about a couple of years ago. So it was on like not for much, otherwise I wouldn't be here. So I don't have like some stuff. But it was just kind of kept dragging on for 8-9 years. But it was really fun to kind of see our research go from the lab to a product, because it was so simple. A lot of tech companies that didn't have a customer support kind of environment, it's expensive, right, to provide this one-on-one support. They could enable this and make it work on their website, right? So users can help each other out. But one thing I'll note, and I wrote a paper about this at CHI a few years ago too, just like sharing the experience. It's not, when we do research, yeah, we want to help people make it, we're thinking about their needs, especially in HCI, but we don't really think about the business needs at all, right? And how, like, what does it take for them to integrate something like this? And end users don't get to decide what kind of help an application offers. It's a business decision. So for us, when we were doing the startup, just simply showing, oh, people can learn better and get the help, that wasn't really enough for them. So we had to kind of show, how do we provide some other clear value to the business that was integrating the tool in their application? Because it was, our customer here was a business entity. And the business entity wasn't just a one-person thing, right? There were many different stakeholders who would have to approve the innovation. So this included people like, the director of customer experience. Oh, how would that change my interaction with my customers? The e-commerce director, like marketing people, head of support. How does it change, whatever help system they had and how they provided support? How would it impact that? Data scientists, who were working in the background collecting this, and software developers, obviously, who had to kind of code this up and integrate it, and interaction designers. And there was a lot of hesitation. And I think this is one of the big reasons why we didn't make it like so big, because it changed the look and feel of the application. And it also propagated negative comments that people could leave, right? So yeah, you can have, it wasn't all like just positive stuff like, oh, this is great, or I need help with this. Like people would like, I don't know, have swear words or whatever. And you're making it when something doesn't work, people get frustrated, and that all of that was getting propagated, and the companies did not want that. So for them, it's better to have that stuff hidden in the forums rather than to have it up, right? So there's a social aspect here. It's not just a technical thing. It's not an HCI thing. So that was an important lesson that we learned. And I was like, okay, that's how the real world kind of works in the business world. And sometimes it competes with what we may be trying to do in research. But so, I had my research job and I kept going in this direction, pushing a little bit more on, okay, how do we push the boundaries of this type of research? And Lemonade was very much an asynchronous type of tool. You put questions and hopefully somebody will answer. But we wanted to also explore this idea of doing real-time help, because sometimes you need help at that moment. So going back to the 3D modeling example, we actually had a tool that again, the student Nathaniel, and then Prashant was another student who got involved. So they decided to kind of use the Lemonade idea, but do it in real time. So that, when I'm working on a 3D modeling project, if I need help at, rotating my model or something, and I click on it, I should be able to talk to somebody at that location. So we tried this out in a tool called Marmalade, where users could kind of share their work in progress and establish a shared visual context, and then initiate real-time one-on-one conversations. Show you this video, hopefully it works. So here somebody's, going about building their 3D model, and they've done a couple of things. And once they have a question, they can quickly share their workspace with another person and connect with them. So here's a Q&A thing. They click on it. So they initiate a chat, and, you ask this question. So Bob is asking this question, and then Alex logs in and provides an answer right there, and you can see it. And we saw people doing lots of interesting things in our user study, where we saw people responding multiple conversations at different locations, because you could really get the visual referent. And instead of being ambiguous in like email or something else, you could immediately see how people were answering it. And people actually wanted to save this information. That was something interesting we learned. It became like a little guide, a guide for them, like a little tutorial that, okay, this is how I created the 3D model. These were the questions I had, and they saved it for future work, which was really interesting. And then, they had these multiple conversations specific to the geometry of their model. So these are, some of the projects that we tried out in terms of real time. Another project that I'll showcase is my PhD student, Leighton Vermette, who just recently graduated. They wanted to go even further. So instead of just giving Q&A and answers to people, can we just let them borrow features directly? Sometimes it's actually too complicated, and you tell people, okay, can you just do it for me? So we did this project on Canvas. I think most of you are probably familiar with our beautiful Canvas learning management system. So it's actually used worldwide by, I think, 30 million people. There's lots and lots of universities that are investing in it, but there's lots of hidden features. I think 70% of its features never get used because people are simply not aware, or you have some techie instructors will customize their environments, and most other people can't figure them out. So what Leighton did was, in his research, he did very thorough studies of instructors and even teachers in high school. We actually had a partnership with Microsoft for this work earlier on. So really looking at, how do they customize their learning environments, and, and as he was doing this research, actually the pandemic happened, and everybody was moving online. So this became actually very relevant as we were all trying to set up our classrooms online. So it was a very simple approach that he had in terms of the installing of it. It was a browser plugin, so we didn't have to depend on anybody else to integrate the help like I had to do with Lemonade. If you had a browser plugin, you could actually make this functional, and it allowed you to import customized features from other instructors of Canvas courses. So if I really like what Wendy's doing in her class, I could simply use this tool and go into her environment and borrow it and make it functional on my end. So it was very, very powerful in that sense, right? So the way it worked was, there's a little sidebar that Customizer added. So this is coming from a browser plugin. And you can see top sort of instructions that other instructors had shared, right? So this is how, Alice had designed her homepage, and these are some of the customizations. This is what Bob had done. So Charlie had done. So you can browse through and read a little blurb, and then immediately click on it to see how that may look like in your own environment. So we had a way in which, sorry, this is just replaying it. So we had a way in which you could actually try it before you imported the features. If I just wanted to kind of see what would it look like, I could try it, and then I could import it without actually learning what the steps were or getting into the technical details of it. This video is yeah, there you go. So you can scroll down, see more detailed, and then import it into your own environment if you wanted. And so that made it easier to kind of do this feature sharing. And So there's a lot of like technical work in the background that we had to do to learn, how do you actually make this functional? But it was cool from a social perspective too. And we actually ran a field study here at SFU where we had a bunch of instructors who, tried it out for like a month and, did all kinds of different things with it. So the yellow stuff is when the new features are added in your own environment. So it actually, got them to, sorry, next slide. So, the field study really helped us see the nuances and how instructors would use this in practice and, what they valued in terms of, it wasn't just about just taking somebody's features, but actually learning about what are the possibilities and being able to browse other instructors' environments. It was really like, even for me, I'm like, wow, okay, that's how you set up your course. Because normally, right, you just kind of keep doing what you were used to. But this sort of, allowed them to learn about unfamiliar features. And it also reduced the social burden of going and asking for help and knocking on somebody's door, right? Sometimes you feel intimidated. You don't want to go bug your colleague and look stupid in front of them, right? We all sort of feel that way. And we also saw some colleagues started about, okay, this is a way in which we could have consistency. So if you have multiple sections of a course, you could actually make them consistent and just use each other's stuff. And like some people got inspired to like further customize on their own, and they did all kinds of things. So you could take somebody's customized feature and add more stuff to it too. So that was a really nice kind of outcome of it. And then my student Amir Jahan Lu, who also just finished his dissertation, he was actually a CIAT student. So he, pushed on this kind of idea as well, but in a different context of helping people animate. So his dissertation focused on motion graphics and how do you help novices create their own like sort of informational videos. So and the animation part is always the tricky part. So the way he did it was you could actually browse a library of animations that other users had done who had more experience and so forth. And then you could just take it and apply it in your own context. So here, if I want to make this ball bounce and I have no idea about the math and how do you make the animation work, but I could pick something that's close, like a basketball, and I could just apply it. So this was his like pretty cool work in the motion graphics space. So when we do these kinds of projects, we run into many different kinds of challenges. So at the technical level was like determining, okay, what is appropriate context? Because I keep saying, in application, in context, what does that mean? And it really varies depending on what type of application we're working with. And we kind of have to look at the data sources that are coming from the application layer or the presentation layer. What can we exploit in order to do this? And then in terms of the social interactions and connecting users with each other, how do you actually get contributions from different types of authors? As I think this audience is probably familiar, most of us are lurkers and, not contributors in these social systems, right? So you see the long tail graph that used to be put out before. Most of us are, not contributing content. So we've seen these in our deployments as well. People are eager to ask questions, but very few people will actually provide the answers. So you need some sort of a system, like having a support person who's part of it to actually provide correct answers. That's another thing too. You don't want to give the wrong answers. And then all of that combined, the HCI problem is how do you design a user interface that's intuitive, that's actually going to present the output of these retrieval and recommendation algorithms in a way that other people can understand and make use of them. And then how do you validate the designs and user studies? And, I like to do field studies, but they add a few more ones of development to make these systems robust and whatnot. So lots of things, but when they work well and you get positive feedback or becomes a startup, then it feels good that, okay, we're helping real people. But as I mentioned earlier, locating relevant help or instructions is only one part of the puzzle, right? Once you have that piece of instruction, how do you actually apply it in your own context? And can users actually make use of the instructions and do something with it? And that's where we've seen a lot of roadblocks, right? Yeah, retrieval is great, but how do I actually use it in a way that is relevant to my own background, to my own training, and to my knowledge of the application itself? So one of my students, Nergis Ashtari, just graduated recently. She was exploring this in her work. Can we personalize help retrieval? So if I know about your programming background, about your 3D modeling background, and about how much familiarity you have with a particular application, can I suggest you tutorials that are more personalized? So she did a lot of great work here in doing empirical studies and building this tool for people who are building augmented reality and virtual reality applications, so you can get really targeted help materials there that actually work for you. We've also been looking at automating real-time help. I think you were mentioning chatbots. So some of our work has been looking at, how do we build useful in-context chatbots for these feature-rich applications? And this particular project was done prior to all the LLM stuff. So I will get to that later. But I was really driven by, can we actually make Clippy useful? You guys know what Clippy is? It's like that annoying assistant in Microsoft Word and other types of Office products, where it would like kind of be like, oh, it looks like you're writing a letter, and everybody would just like shut it off, right? But there was a lot of interesting things that it was doing at a technical level in the background, kind of learning about your context, and then offering you something, but it ended up being obtrusive. But now there's Copilot and other things that are being explored in this space as well. So we'll see how that goes. But my student, Anjali, for her master's, she was looking at, what if chatbots could explain what they can and cannot do? And would that change our behavior? Right. So if I can tell you, okay, these are my limits, you give it a query and it's like, okay, I can understand this, but not this part. So how would that change their trust and then their transparency and so forth? And we found actually by doing this, we call these explainable chatbots. And we were able to make some gains in transparency, but not so much in trust. Users still don't trust these things very well. And this is before the LLM days of using chatbots. So I always get this question now, okay, what about ChatGPT, LLMs for help seeking? And we did actually recently do a paper on this. So where we compared ChatGPT with our own version of ChatGPT, it was just enhanced a little bit with doing prompt suggestions, because prompting is very difficult for people. Just like I mentioned with search engines, coming up with the right prompt for these generative AI systems is actually very difficult. So we gave them some prompt suggestions and we enhanced it with technical documentation for software, because we built this specifically for a couple of different software, I think Excel and PowerPoint. And so we ran the study to compare, okay, what would it look like? And we found that the prompting struggle still continued. Even if you give them tips in context, they just kind of ignore them because it's so easy to type something in natural language. Most people just want to do it. And at the ground truth or technical level, we found that our system actually was more accurate and relevant in providing help. But people could not recognize this difference. And which was really surprising for us. They ranked both systems as being accurate and relevant. And this was because they couldn't actually, the way these LLMs present the output, I don't know how many of you are familiar, right? It's very confident. So for example, in one of the cases for PowerPoint, we had a little animation task and ChatGPT said, oh yeah, just use this exact feature in PowerPoint. And it gave step-by-step instruction, which was completely wrong. It doesn't exist. But the way it's presented, it gives people confidence like, oh, I'm stupid. I don't know. I can't find it. Yeah, I can't be wrong. It's giving me the step-by-step instructions, right? So a lot of times there's a technical term called hallucination when these generative AI systems are doing that. When people couldn't actually map it to the menu functions. And then, so it was very, it's actually very dangerous because they were forming an incorrect mental model of the software application. They felt like something should exist when it doesn't exist. And then they were getting messed up, not just by the chat output and what they were supposed to do, but also overall, how they're supposed to make use of the application. We are currently doing some follow-up work here. So I'll have more to share maybe next year. Another one of my students, Rimika, has been looking at initially when I showed you that picture when we were doing the 3D modeling, people are going all over the place. This happens in other kind of learning contexts as well. And she's been exploring this idea of helping people self-monitor. Like if you could actually, we did that, that initial graph that I showed you was built by hand, right? Doing a lot of manual process to look at user behavior based on the videos of their interaction and and our own observations. So now she's been building this tool that allows people to self-monitor automatically. So if you are engaged in a learning task, and so it's keeping track of your videos, it's keeping track of your interactions with tutorials, and then the end is generating a visualization like this. So we're trying to see if you could actually self-monitor your patterns. Could you become more aware of what is working and what is not working? Like if you realize, oh my God, I spent 10 hours watching videos this week on this topic and I actually feel like I learned nothing, do you end up changing your strategy? So this is one of our ongoing studies right now. So I'm kind of excited to see what we'll find there. We're also, just to wrap up, exploring new modalities of interaction. Most of my stuff has been in the software and desktop domain and online domain. But as new things are, coming up, we've been looking at augmented reality, virtual reality environments. And one cool thing that one of my students, David Wong, is doing is he's trying to bring back the power of paper and interacting on paper, but doing it in a way that is connected to digital feedback and stuff. So he's built this tool called TangiBooks. Right now, it's for the programming domain. So I'm teaching novice programming concepts using books, but they're connected. So they're kind of like enabled by these IoT style objects, and there's like sensors and stuff. And it feels like you're interacting on paper, but it's giving you feedback, and you can use like hand gestures, you can see things light up, you can speak to them. So it's meant to be for promoting learning, and we're doing something for instructors this summer. So we're building an authoring toolkit so they can actually build their own TangiBooks and see if we can get, some, there was a video here, I think. So you can see, like things light up, and you can hover over things, you can click on things and do more haptic style interaction, but kind of bringing back the benefit of like touching something and feeling, and it's less distracting than when you're trying to learn online, where you might get lost in a sea of resources. And a lot of these projects are ongoing in the summer, and we're always looking for participants. If anybody's interested, you can always reach out. Yeah, the main message here that I want to send is, one size fits all approaches simply do not work. When we're thinking about designing some tool, some help approach, some learning approach, it's really important to understand people, their tasks, workflows, and perceptions. And that's what it really boils down to. Often when I give this talk in more CS environments, they're like, well, what is the technical problem, right? This is all like people stuff. But yeah, that is the more complex aspect of this. People are difficult, much more than machines and algorithms, which you can be more objective about, but people mess things up. Users, they're like, everything works until you show it to a user. And the jokes that we have. Yeah, and so it is painful, but I think we need to do it. And there's lots of different methods that we use, and these are continually like pushing the boundary. And now with this more AI stuff, it's becoming even more important. And there's a new domain of human AI interaction that's emerging, right? So that's keeping us on our toes. But I feel like the same things that we've been doing in terms of observing people, interviewing them, doing field deployments, lab studies, it's going to help us figuring out what users actually care about, how do they interact, where the pain points are, and so forth. So with that, yeah, thank you so much. And lots of sponsors and people who've been involved, all of my PhD students and master's students and even undergrads, without whom, none of these projects would be successful. So yeah,